Oh, I don't want to tell this story. um, my third year in the Valiance League, we opened on the road against the Regents. That's Green Bay. That's Wisconsin in mid-April. A lot of snow moves in. They call the game that morning. Maybe we'll be able to get one game of the series in that week. But we've already come into town and we have nothing to do now. I tell some of the guys, look, I'm not sitting around here in the motel for 2 days watching TV. I'm walking around. It doesn't look too bad out there. And I know our uniforms are on the bus and any little bit of extra warmth, So I get my jersey out of the trunks. Harry Brzezinski would have killed me if he had found out. I put my jacket on and I start walking around Green Bay in the beautiful snow on opening day. And it gets heavier and heavier and the wind really starts to blow. And then, yes, there's ice mixed in and I'm getting farther and farther out and a little lost. I start to see cars sliding and getting stuck. Suddenly we're in a blizzard. I just hadn't been paying close enough attention to the weather report. It's really dire out there. I have to help people who are getting stuck. I have no gloves. And I have a premonition. I'd never had one before in my life. I see clearly that I'm going to die out here in my Lake Dogs jersey. They're going to find my frozen body. They're going to think I martyred myself. And this is how I'm going to be remembered. Finally, I stumble into another motel. In the lobby, there's like a 14-year-old kid working the desk. I say, can I just sit here until the storm gets better? He says, sure. He has to go find a chair for me from the back. I sit down in it. I stare into space. The kid is listening on the radio to the big leagues. Yankees, Brewers on this little transistor radio, almost all static. Figures it had to be the Yankees. They gave me the worst scouting score any team ever gave me. 3 hours. I just sit there, watching the storm out the window on opening day. The Regents couldn't play the first 6 games of their season.
Paul Schell lives on 3 acres of land with his wife, Tina, on a quiet country road in Chestertown, Maryland. The following interview took place over the course of 3 early evenings in various spots on the property. The screened back porch, the tiny fish pond created this past summer beside the duck roost, the picnic table under the red cedar tree. Paul is 52 years old.
I don't think there's any way I could remember all this in time order, but I can definitely go back to how I got to the Lake Dogs. It was after 3 years of playing for Monroeville and then 4 for Newark. And I probably should have known it was over when I got moved from short to third. That was pretty much the sign that the clubs were losing interest in seeing what I could do. We used to say, if you hadn't moved up by year 5, it was time to take night classes. Then at the start of that last year, the wheels fell off the bat. And I can't explain it to this day, about 2 weeks into the season. We had a 6-game series in Rochester. I felt fine, but 1 for 23 in that series. My contact was just really weak. And on the bus back to Newark, I was lost. I was deep into slump mode, and it got worse from there. And in year 8 of a minor league career, when you've never gotten to where you're supposed to go, you can't have that kind of slump. That's it for your career. We broke down my swing. We tried to slow things down. We worked on getting it pitches up in the zone, which was always a weak spot for me, but nothing was working. It was some kind of death spiral, no cause that we could figure out. Could not hit. I started to think it was psychological. I had felt when the season began this weird sense of inevitability. You always worked in the off season, definitely, and you tried to keep that going the very day practices started. It was tight. So as soon as I went back to St. Michael's in September, I worked at True Value Hardware, I worked at the movie theater. What you're always trying to do in the minors was not become a zine boy. A zine boy was someone who sold magazines door to door, almost always for a terrible company called New American Journals Incorporated. But this was something you could do while you're on the road during the season, or on our days off. Instead of sitting around diners smoking, we could hit the streets of wherever we were and make a little extra money. Some of the guys got more creative, but I was never that smart. There was a guy once, Bill Theodore, pitcher. One pitch, he had a nasty curve, really not much more than that, but we were playing in Shreveport on a Saturday afternoon game, and he came in about the 7th inning. We were up 6-3 or something. He mows down the first 3 guys he faces, but for some reason he was working real fast. Like, the time between his pitches was really shorter than normal. So we figured, okay, maybe he's working on his timing. But he's also checking the clock a lot on the old scoreboard in the outfield, this old-fashioned thing with baseball bats for hands. I'm sitting next to him on the bench, and I'm noticing this because he's doing the same thing as soon as he comes back in from the 8th inning. And in the 8th, he was pitching faster than in the 7th. Bam! And the hitters are just whiffing at his stuff. 9th inning comes, he goes out to the mound. You've never seen someone pitch so fast. The hitters keep calling time and stepping out because he just won't give them a second. So he strikes out the side. We win. Bill vanishes. And the last I see of him, he's pushing his bike out of the clubhouse. And Kenny Blum is saying to him, "Hey man, do you realize what you did? You pitched 3 perfect innings with like no contact. This has almost never been done." But he was in a hurry because he was trying to get across town on his bike to do magic tricks at some kid's birthday party. This is how he made extra money. And he couldn't be late. After I finally broke the slump, John Puller called me in and he told me I was being sent down to Petersburg. That would have been the 3rd time. And I told him, I don't think I want to go. I think this is it for me. I think it's time. And he got it. John and I, he was not an easy man to get along with. He was hard on his players. He was one of those older managers who it killed him to see dumb mistakes and potential wasted. That was what he got mad at. And when he did, he got so mad, some players never forgave him for the things he said. John looks at me and he says, "What are you, 27 now?" And I said, "Yeah." And he thinks for a minute and he says, "All right, I think you're making the right call." The thing is, here was how tight the money was. If I told the team I didn't want to be sent down, there was no severance. The pay just stopped. I was basically fired. So here's the one reason I defend John Puller. To save me the cost of the bus ticket back home, he offered to let me ride with the team 2 weeks, all the way through the road trip down the coast from Connecticut. And at the end, at least, my sister could come pick me up. We just had to keep it from the GM. So I couldn't sign the register at any of the motels we stayed at. I couldn't get my per diem. And at the games, I couldn't sit on the bench or even in the clubhouse. I had to be up in the stands with comp tickets, otherwise my cover would be blown. And I wound up spending more money on food than if I had just gotten the Greyhound home. But John knew, I think, that it was a good way to go out. So my last memory of my minor league career was we were eating at a truck stop outside Baltimore, the whole team, and the check came, and everyone got back on board the bus except me. A lot of handshaking. John shook my hand, and they went on, and I sat down in a plastic chair outside the little truck stop there, and I waited for my sister to come. Just watched the bus go. No more baseball. I was no longer a baseball player. Chrissy got me a job as the sales manager at her magazine, her children's magazine. I had no experience whatsoever. I definitely learned to talk to people. That was one skill I did pick up. I started to make some actual money little by little. And then It was almost 3 years after I quit baseball. Someone called me and told me John Puller was retiring. And glad to be retiring, was the rumor. There are guys who wake up in the morning and put on the uniform and step out in front of thousands of fans and think, God, let me please work in a pharmacy. Mike Blanchard got up to the bigs for 5 months once and never reported back to Reno when he got sent back down. And he told me he was just sick of baseball. Not the grind, he just disliked the sport. He'd always wanted to play soccer instead. Anyway, there were some guys going to John's retirement party who I wanted to see again. So I drove down, and Stillwell Dennis caught up with me. He was the assistant coach at Newark. Everybody liked Stillwell. He was like the small-town pastor in a movie. You'd let a ground ball go under your legs twice in one game, and John came for your head. But Stillwell would basically say to you, son, let us pray. He said to me out of nowhere, do you have any interest in trying out for the Valiants League? I can get you a tryout. And by that time, the Valiants League already had its reputation pretty firm, which was that the Valiants League was where you went when you were completely done, but functional. It was purely a for-profit league where everybody was either a has-been or a never was, so that was its little niche. The players were there to barnstorm and make a buck and win some kind of title, not develop. And somehow the owners have been able to keep it going for 5 years already, but you never knew when it just might fold. I told Stillwell I was honestly surprised he would even think I had anything left in the tank. And I think I took it as a compliment too much because it started me thinking. And I said, yeah, set me up with the tryout, but I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my sister, no one. This was purely just a day of baseball. I really still felt the need to impress someone, I think. Because on your way out the door of the game, 99% of us don't get a testimonial dinner or even somebody to put an arm around your shoulder and say, thanks. Thanks for being a player all these years. Thanks for being a buddy. No, it's signing something down at the player resources office. The lady there gives you a nice smile. You get your check and a copy of your forms or whatever, and you're down the long hallway. I drove 13 hours to Joliet. I showed up at Pope's Field. It was a tryout for 5 or 6 guys. I got there 2 hours early, before I could even get into the park. And I stood outside the right field gate, and I looked at the grass. You know, it was nice and wet from the dew in the sun. And I started to feel a little bit ridiculous, like I was at a job interview. But I already had a job. I had a good job. And I could keep making more money there and get a house and probably get married in a few years. It had all been coming together. There was a little gap in the gates, and I did a weird thing. I squeezed through it. No one was around, and I sat in the bleachers. I would have left if someone had kicked me out. I wouldn't have even gone through with the tryout. And once I was sitting there, things changed somehow. I've been thinking all week about a guy on the team with me in Monroeville, this not very good catcher, Michael Shire. Good guy, but one of these people that you don't know what the hell he's talking about ever. Probably wound up with a PhD in physics or something. We were on the bench once, and we were talking about someone who'd gotten cut the day before. And Mike said, he would always say this, off to maintenance. And I finally asked him what that meant. He had this grand theory of life, which was that there were only 3 stages to life: discovery, maintenance, and decline. So discovery is when every experience is new, and you're finding everything out, all these grand things. Maintenance is when you finally settle down and just try to keep the train on the rails as long as you can, as best as you can. And decline is when your life is kind of done and you're starting to cope with mortality and such. Part of the theory was that you couldn't avoid the phases. Everyone had to go through all 3, but Mike said what you could try to do was postpone going into the next one for as long as you could. I'm sitting in the bleachers and something about the grass, I don't know, I was thinking about that. So I did the tryout, and I got signed a week later. Welcome to the Joliet Lake Dogs. Phil Gannett was fat. He was a fat baseball player. But he had power, so he rolled around the Valiance League from the beginning. Every year he put on more weight. There was nothing he could do but DH. At some point, it was like looking at one of those old-timey photos of the early days of baseball with the guys with the stick legs and the big gut. We were playing the Plymouth Black Sheep, day game, pretty good crowd. This is when Phil was getting tired. He did not want to go to work for his father in the masonry business, but it was looking like this had to be his last year. It's the sixth inning or so. On the mound that day for Plymouth was the oldest player in the league, Bert LaMonica, 44 years old. Fastball went about 44 miles an hour, but he could locate. I always had a little trouble hitting him. Phil knocks a tapper to Bert's left, and instinctively he makes this awkward lunge for it, and he grabs it. Should have let it go through to the second baseman, but instinct. But the first baseman reacted to the ball by moving to his right. He was already way off first to begin with. So suddenly it was up to Bert to have to take the ball all the way to first for the tag. Phil starts chugging down the line like a stegosaurus, and the oldest player in the league is puffing to first, trying to beat him there. And the visual of this instantly connected with the crowd, 5,000 people. And in that 1 second, everyone started laughing and jeering, and both benches were just riveted by this spectacle of glacial movement. These two ex-athletes merging toward first. I saw Phil's tongue hanging out the side of his mouth, and I don't even remember who. Bert got there first. Yeah, very light collision at the bag when it happened. If that didn't just sum up the Valiance League sometimes. So the crowd settled down and the game went on, but the Plymouth radio guy kept talking about it for another 2 innings. And then some writer for the Plymouth paper wrote a hilarious bit about it that day. And 2 weeks later, Koch Foley's in the locker room in Joliet, strumming a guitar, and he's written a song about that moment. It was called Slow Motion Destiny. This was an entire song. He had all these lyrics like Casey at the bat, but about Bert and Phil trying to get to first base before the other guy did. Lines about the seasons changing as they were running. The thing was, the song was too good. Koch had some talent, but this particular melody was just really memorable. The Joliet oldies station found out about it somehow, and they asked him to come in and sing it live. So he and Phil go in together and they sing this thing on the air. It was kind of a local hit. It kept getting played. The year after Koch stopped playing, he got a call from Columbia Records for the rights to that song. They took that thing, they changed the lyrics, they gave it to some one-hit wonder, and then they put it out as some song about a high school dance. It made it to the charts at like number 38. So because these two guys should have stopped playing 3 years before they actually did, Koch made enough money to pay for the first year of his kid's college. With the Valiance League, there were 10 closed preseason games. And it was always fun because that was where the rules changes got tested. There was one big rule change got tested almost every year. They'd explain them to us at the first team meeting every spring. The rules committee, which was like 3 people, had decided there was going to be a new thing. We'd place little bets on what we thought they'd be. Nothing ever made it to the regular season, though. Not one change was ever seen by an actual paying crowd. Every single one got voted down, and the process would start over next year. There was the preseason where if you were set down in order, 1, 2, 3, nobody getting on base, then the other team would start their half of the inning with a runner on second. This was the idea that what you did on defense and pitching in the field should have a carryover effect. It did make a 1, 2, 3 inning more interesting. I thought that one might take. They tried no leaving the box at all between pitches if you were a batter. No warm-up throws for a new pitcher coming in. They did the 6-man lineup toward the end. 6-man lineup, give the star players more at-bats, juice things up a bit. Still 9 guys in the field, so they would have had to give bonuses to all the other guys who only played defense just to keep them around. My favorite rule got rid of extra innings entirely. If you were tied at the end of 9, guess what? You both lost. L. I love that. Some team probably would have won a title with a losing record. But hey, you can't beat the other team in 9 innings? What do you think we're doing here? Participation trophies? You lose. When it got down to the last couple of outs, you saw a lot of steals, a lot of drag bunts, squeeze plays, a lot of hit and run, guys taking these hero swings. I dug it. I always liked hearing about the changes they thought about but didn't dare even try with no one watching. I couldn't believe some of these were even discussed. There was one, if you pulled your starter, if you didn't go the whole way, the other team got a run on the board, just like that. Reliever comes out, boom, run. Oh yeah, you want to slow the game down by changing pitchers? Take that. No gloves for outfielders. This was almost a thing. Too many routine plays in the outfield. That was the thinking. No drama to a fly ball. It was all very, very, get more drama, get more drama into the game. Yeah, I always wanted to be on that rules committee. I don't know what they were smoking sometimes. Every manager in the league wanted them executed. And in the end, it was just the same old game. This was, it was the Long Island Helmsman. It was actually the second game of a doubleheader. I teed off on this pitch, went opposite field, and I got enough of it to make it to the right field corner. And Jose Cavell leaps at the foul pole. He crashes into the wall, and he saves it from going out, but it pops out of his mitt, and it dribbles into the corner. And Jose is down. So I know right away I'm going all the way around. Jose gets up, and he finally tracks the ball down as I'm between second and third. And he spins, and he unleashes this dart that sails over the second baseman, bounces one time in the infield and into the catcher's mitt. I dive head first, but he swipes me on the back of the neck, and Frank Olmhall rings me up. I'm out. Once in a generation throw. Everyone's speechless. It could not be done. Our manager that year was Steve Kekich. He argued everything, so we came out to argue that, but I was already walking away. I was so angry with myself. At some point, J.J. Amaldi walks off the mound and he says something really nasty to Steve about wasting time. And J.J. hated Steve, hated him from the time he played for him. And Steve kind of lunged at him. J.J. lunged back, and Steve decked him. One shot to the chin. Our manager punched an opposing player. The bench is empty. I come out, and before Frank can break anything up, Steve and JJ are swapping punches, real punches. Our third base coach was Bob Clancy. He takes an accidental shot to the face. I get Steve around the waist with both arms, and I'm pulling him backwards. And somebody helps me body tackle him to the ground. A bunch of other guys are fighting. I don't even know why. And hello, here comes, out of the stands, a bunch of hooligans just taking advantage of the chaos. They jump out onto the field and just start running around. No point. There's now about 100 people on the field. It's more fans than players. Someone pries Steve up, and I see some guy running the bases, and I see another guy prying second base out of the dirt as security comes after him. He tucks the base under his arm, and he sprints towards center field. JJ is hauled away by somebody. Everyone's getting ejected left and right. There's 2 security people for the whole stadium trying to corral dozens of idiots. Half of Long Island's team is chasing after individual hooligans. Everyone in the stands is still jumping up and down. 15 minutes it takes to calm everything down. Bob Clancy's in the clubhouse with a broken nose. The players are back in the dugouts. I figure the umpires all gather around home plate. They're just tallying up ejections. It's like 11 guys getting thrown out. But now Olmhall is in deep discussion with the helmsman's manager and about 4 other people. And Olmhall, about 20 minutes after I was tagged out, suddenly points at me. He's reversing the call. The rest of the crew convinced him. They're saying my hand got the plate before the tag. Bedlam. Everyone comes back out of the dugouts. People come out of the stands again. Domino effect. It must be okay. Everyone else is doing it. I think it was being too long in the sun. Double header. That was like hour number 6 by that point. They don't even know what to do when they get there. They're happy to run over here, run over there. It's Woodstock without the music. Just the mud and the drunks. But there's this group of morons out and left. They're crowded around the scoreboard. They've undone the plastic flap over the bulbs that light up the digits in the top half of the 7th. They're unscrewing the bulbs and stealing them rather than let the run stand. There's not enough security to stop them. So when they disperse, because the players chase them off, there's a black gap where the bulb should be. There's no way to show the run that I scored. You think you understand fans after so many years, but then you see one running across the outfield holding a light bulb over his head and yelling in triumph like it's the French Revolution. But Steve Kekic, that was it for him. He always had a short fuse. I just don't think when he got up that morning, he suspected his managing career was ending that day. He wound up coaching in Canada. It's tough to get a job in baseball when you're fired for attacking a player on the field. None of it mattered anyway. We wound up winning by 5. Jose told me a couple weeks later, the ball touched the foul pole before I knocked it back down. It was a home run anyway. The regular season went into late October. And that was a little long for me. There would come a day when the excitement level wasn't what you wanted. There came that one day when it first got just a little cold. There was that snap in the air. And maybe we'd be playing an afternoon game, and toward the very end, they'd maybe put the lights on. If it was a home game, I'd walk back to my apartment. It was only 6 blocks. And I'd cut through this long cobblestone alley I liked all the way home. And that chill on that day would make me think of, I don't know, getting older. And the last week of the season would have that same feeling. You were too involved during the game to feel that. But when you left the stadium, at least in the East, with your jacket on, there was that sadness. In October, I would very slowly pack up my things in the apartment and prepare to make the trip back to St. Michael's. And once everything was packed up, I had nothing to do much on days off, but I would go for really long walks south of the Speedway. I'd walk around the farms there. There's one cow I got to know really well. I'd walk up to the same fence every time, and the cow would come over sometimes. And I'd say, well, friend, another season, and I still can't crack 290. And I'd get some really good empathy there. That was the kind I needed. Ken Steakley was another music guy, except his band was called the Mutant Attorneys. And he called what they did moonshine rock. They did terrible covers of famous country music songs. And it was just the most unmusical hollering you ever heard. It took about half the song to tell what song it actually even was. Ken would just stand there in a bar and scream the lyrics with these 2 guys behind him strumming. He got anyone who knew 2 chords to play. And they only got hired to play because it was a spectacle. He would leap all over the stage as he screamed and hollered. And he'd wave this man-sized Joliet Lake Dogs flag. And the running joke was you were supposed to jump up on stage and pour whatever you were drinking on the flag. And he wouldn't ever clean it. So every set he did, and no place would put up with more than 3 songs, the filthier the flag got. Out came this disgusting, discolored Lake Dogs flag, and everyone would go crazy. And the dark secret came out one year. Ken signed up to sing the national anthem before one of our games, which had actually become a very common thing. The league had a nice regular cycle of 20 players who did it. On any given day around the league, some player would do the national anthem. Ken gets out there on the mound, puts his cap over his heart, and it was maybe the best sounding version of the song we'd ever heard. He'd been hiding this amazing voice behind moonshine rock for years. Then he went right back to banging his head on amplifiers and waving that disgusting flag. sometimes you think back and you think, okay, did that really happen, or am I putting a weird slant on things? But then you go back to the local newspaper from that day, and yes, there's the box score. Bob Rye was pitching for us against Dakota. His first start ever. He'd been a reliever, but our pitching was so depleted that year. Everyone was banged up, and then in June, the stomach flu hit. I got spared, but it cost us 3 games in the standings. One random stomach bug. We were totally desperate. Bob gets absolutely tattooed in the first inning. They're batting around. He can't even get 2 strikes on anybody. Stu goes out to the mound and explains to him, look, we've got to give our guys some rest. You're it for at least 5 innings. I'm sorry. Just keep it in the zone. 9 runs in the first inning he gives up. He has to suffer through the whole thing. On a normal day, he's pulled after the 6th run. He guzzles some water. He comes out for the second inning. 24 up, 24 down. Perfect game. He didn't allow a single other batter on base the whole day. We lost 9-4. All this applause raining down on him when he finally walked off the field after the top of the 9th. He stops on the third baseline and does this great slow bow. Then he puts the ball into his hat, puts his hat into the glove, and throws the whole thing underhanded into the third row. Another thing I'd never seen before. That part, not in the box score. There was a game we won 3-2. I remember the score, but now not who we were playing. But it was at Pope's Field. Anyway, the game ended on a fly out to center field. And keep in mind, it was a long top of the 9th, like 2 pitching changes and walks, and Stu argued to call it third and got thrown out. The team comes running in off the field. We're slapping each other on the back. Good game, good game. Even the umpires are more or less gone. We're all pretty much at the dugout steps. But you could sense that not everyone in the stands was leaving. And there was a lot of chatter going on. And the other team, it was Olympia. They're already in their clubhouse. Finally, I hear some woman in the stands. She's shouting, "There's only 2 outs." Everyone had missed it. Something about the way Donnie Zhao had started charging in after he caught that fly with such confidence. It just started this chain of, okay, we're done here. And nobody involved in the actual professional game of baseball noticed what was happening. A couple of guys had a weird feeling of, wait a second, but nobody spoke up. Well, it must be 3 outs, otherwise the umps would tell us. Turned out one guy spoke up. Mort Indler did on the radio. He says, well, ladies and gentlemen, it appears the Lake Dogs have heard Mom calling them in for dinner, so I guess it's choose your own ending night. Took 20 minutes to get everyone back. The whole Allentown thing started because the city owned the team, which meant they owned the stadium. So they made a decision to open it up to everything that happened in the entire city. County fair, livestock shows, marching band competitions, community flea market. Everyone would come tramping into the stadium. So inside of a year, the field was a mess. Sometimes they just had to take this completely toxic green paint and go over the patches of dirt in the outfield. And nothing was a normal shape. Like the mound was kind of circular, but from the wear of all those thousands of feet week after week, it would sort of puff out in places. And the warning track, you couldn't tell where the outfield ended and it started sometimes. The entire playing area looked like if a kid with a crayon colored it in and then took his little thumb and smushed the colors into each other. It was a total joke. And you would play games and just hope to God it didn't rain. The poor ground couldn't take it. Any drizzle and you were done for the day. The umpires would have to call the game. The place started to get a reputation. You had a series in Allentown, get ready. You want to die for a fly ball and not break your spine? or be able to field a bounce clean, don't come here. It got into their heads. They became the bad guys. This was rough baseball. So here came the nickname. We pulled up in the team bus one day, and there was this banner out in front of the stadium. The Allentown Dukes, welcome to the bad neighborhood. And that really made it permanent. Year 4 of the league, they changed their uniforms. No Valiance League team ever made a single change to their uniforms. When they started, the Dukes had a gray cap with a little old-fashioned crown on it. But then it became this black cap with a spiky crown that you could probably stab someone with. They had more drunks getting thrown out of there than anybody. Of course, there was no way to measure or prove this. It was just common knowledge somehow. They had more injuries. That much had to be true. And the more they lost, I swear, the more people went to their games. They wore that proudly. They would not have been the same team if they had made it to the playoffs, except for that one time. They wouldn't have been interesting. The city at some point sold them to a private owner, some newspaper woman's company with a ton of money. She put a whole lot of improvements into the stadium. And as soon as she said, yes, we're going to fix the field, the whole fan base wouldn't have it. There was a petition. There was a letter writing campaign. Who are you to come in here and improve our field into something not to be deeply ashamed of? So it stayed pretty much the way it was. Harry Brzezinski would say the only stain that was tougher for him to get out of a uniform than grass was the fake paint in Allentown they used to cover the patches where the grass didn't grow right. He'd say, no sliding catches, you understand?
I met Tina through Nate at a barbecue. Back then she was still scuffling around trying to find her career. So just to be able to stop waiting tables, she answered a job ad. And it turned out the job was shuttling prisoners between facilities or to their court dates or doctor's appointments. They trained her up and she was in this van all day. And sometimes these people were pretty hardcore. One day she'd drive this guy, Bedford Corney. Life sentence for killing 2 fellow drug dealers, one of which was his brother. Execution style. He was going in for surgery in Whiting. It's him in the back seat, and Tina and another guard up front who she didn't know. Corney is this huge, intimidating guy, but he's really talkative, and Tina's fine with that. So they start talking about all kinds of things. He's telling them both about his old elementary school. He and Tina had one of the same teachers. The other guard's not having any of it. He's real moody. He's just staring out the window. And then here comes the sports talk. Tina says at one point, oh yeah, my boyfriend plays short for the Lake Dogs. And Corney changes. He says, you're dating that guy? She says, yeah. He says, you know, that guy's the reason they didn't sign Mark Brandauer. And then he goes and he hits a lousy 270 every year and he clogs up the 5th spot in the lineup. And I don't even listen to them on the radio anymore because they suck so bad. And Tina is kind of stunned. This guy knows so much about the Valiance League. And the guard, not a word this whole time. He suddenly turns around and he says, you shut your mouth about the Lake Dogs. With venom apparently dripping from his eyes. And Corney doesn't say a word after that. Just silence. Nate, I guess, was my best friend in the sport. Our first year in the minors, we both had the same host family. Most guys applied to have host families put them up on the road. We had these long regional series, and instead of staying at the horrible motel night after night, you would be taken in, basically. Saved you a little more money, meals, laundry, and such. And we were both taken in by a French family. They were hosting minor leaguers so their English could get better. The father was an executive for some chemical company. We ate there and we slept there for about 40 times. Then year 2, Nate's new family in Pennsylvania was the Whitakers. The Whitakers were pretty old, but they weren't just old. They were mean. It was Nate and one other guy there. They had a curfew. They had chores. I'd pull up once in a while in my father's old beater car, and Nate would be washing the windows. And we ragged him endlessly about it. He'd come into the clubhouse shaking his head. I can't believe they made me paint their fence. And no women visitors inside. Only out on the porch. And on Tuesday mornings, he had to drive them to Bible study. Usually, the host families would come out to a game once in a while. They never did. They just wanted free help around the house. They hosted Nate for 2 years. One time, me and Kenny Blum go over there because we were all going to go selling magazines that day. If you worked in numbers, you could say, oh, we're all minor league baseball players. You got more sales that way. But Nate comes out in this weird sweater with this giant neck. And he gets in the car and he says, just go. Mrs. Whitaker is waving at us from the porch. The second we're out of sight, he takes the sweater off. She made this thing for me and I have to wear it. It was just too easy to make fun of him for the Whitakers thing. One day in the second to last year of the Valiance League, week before we had to report to spring practice, Nate calls me, says, hey, I'm not going to be driving up with you this time. I'm going to be in Monroeville. I'm staying there for the week. It's the Whitaker's house. This is 8 years after the minors. I said, you're visiting the Whitakers? Last I remember, you couldn't stand them. Well, they had gotten a fair bit older, and neither one of them was doing well with their health. They didn't have children, so Nate went back with them a couple of weeks in the early spring, his own choice this time. He did errands for them. He made dinner for them, just like they used to do for him. He sat with them out on that porch for hours. He watched their old TV shows. They were still mean. Never came out to see him play. They couldn't by then. But he took care of them in that little time window, how he could.
Players would come and go all the time, and you got used to that. But I remember being really sad when Mort Indler retired. It felt a little like our patron saint was gone. He was so indelible. It was just by accident he'd even gotten a radio job for the team, and I guess it was just 7 years he did it, but he was an artist. He was an original. We were never consistently good, so I think it was Mort who a lot of people associate with the Lake Dogs more so than any one player. Never a bigger discrepancy between the physical person and the voice. Maybe Patton was like that. They say Patton had a high-pitched voice. Mort was the opposite. Spindly as hell. I could probably do like this and enclose his entire upper arm. But he had that great baritone thing going. I think you could have dropped Mort into any job and he would have carved out his own universe and done it differently than anybody else. He looked at each game like it was a story, but not an epic story. I know he had fights with WPOH about not mentioning the score enough or which inning it was. He wanted you to know it didn't quite mean what you thought it meant. He wanted you to sink into the rhythm and the quiet. He said to me once, there's no way the energy of a crowd is coming through the AM dial. Not 5,000 people at a Valiance League game. And there's 150 games on the schedule, so excitement was not what he was selling. He was selling you a mood. He was selling you a slice of life. It didn't matter to him if it was 3-3 in the bottom of the ninth or 12-1. His delivery didn't change. You had to bring your own energy. He started this thing where he walked around the stands for 2 innings every game, usually the 4th and the 5th, just talking to people live. He had a mic, and sometimes the technology failed him, but when it didn't, it was great because you were suddenly connected to someone else's experience of listening to the game. He talked about where they were from, who were their favorite players. He talked about their jobs, like right on the air. And he would basically keep you up on what was happening on the field, but sometimes he would ask the fan, what's happening now? Or he would let you at home hear the crowd reacting to something. He would wait, and then he would mention what happened. And that was the best part of a Lake Dogs game for a lot of people, those 2 innings of strangers being interviewed in the stands. On April Fool's Day, he just made up stuff. You know, the technical facts of the game were still true, but if you popped up to third or something. Suddenly the third baseman had to lunge and make this great diving catch. Even if he didn't know it was April Fool's Day, but the third inning, you knew something was wrong with this game. He would take it way too far. We had him on in the clubhouse almost always. You could kind of hear it from the bench. One time Steve Green bunted foul on 2 strikes. And Mort on the air says, "Oh my goodness, Green has bunted the ball up into his own mouth and he appears to have swallowed it." I still remember that one. I was in the clubhouse wrapping my elbow and I looked up and I thought, okay, somewhere the station is getting calls about this maniac on the air. Right around the 3rd inning or so, he would get back to normal announcing. The poems came pretty near the end. He just decided to write a long poem for every team in the league, one for each one. And he would try them out on the air in that voice of his. And the post-game show would get more calls about people being upset about which part of a team's history or which players were left out of the poems than any other issue about the Lake Dogs. People would call into POH, 990 AM, Joliet, Illinois, mad because the poem he'd read on the air in the 5th inning about the Hagerstown Patrollers didn't mention Luke Hazy's no-hitter from 3 years before, or he had no feel for the city of Fresno, or whatever. He was on the field one day. He would come down during warm-ups to chat, get material for when he was on the air. And he told me he was retiring. He was maybe 50. And I asked him why, and it turned out POH wanted to pair him up with a legitimate color man. A lot of teams did that. And Mort said no, he wouldn't do that. He wanted to be alone in the booth. It was very important for him to be alone. He wanted to be that one voice in your ear telling you the story of the game the way he was seeing it. He wanted to be your friend, reporting to you, just you, on what he was seeing. He didn't want the listener tuning into a conversation or banter. Even the way he used silence would be gone. Nobody did sports broadcasting silence like Mort Endler. 2 minutes, 4 minutes. It was like he was telling you to just sit and listen for the cues. You'll know when the score changes or somebody gets a big hit. You'll sense it. And I'll tell you the facts when I get back, as if they matter. So he quit, and they went to 2 guys in the booth, and I can't even tell you their names. But I did get from him, as a gift, we all got one, a copy of his book of poems about every team in the Valiance League. I was not mentioned in the Lake Dogs poem, alas. I learned something from Mort Endler, and I learned it too late to apply it to baseball. But I learned it's not the job. All jobs are kind of the same. It's showing up on day one and deciding you're going to leave your mark. You're going to have your own goal. That was how he announced baseball, and that was how he did jazz radio and rock radio, and that was how he ran a diner after all that was done. Nate was never that guy with a sense of humor who rolled with things. I had to tell guys, just maybe leave certain topics alone. He was real sensitive about his height. He was real sensitive about his defense. He couldn't go very long without an error. Usually he'd misjudge a bounce. His fundamentals were sound, but he stopped trusting himself at some point. That's really bad when that happens. Your relationship to the ball itself, the physical object of a baseball, can change. You stop trusting what it's going to do. This thing that's always been the most natural part of what you do in life since you were a little kid, the most natural part of what your passion is. I went through that briefly once a long time ago, but I had Stillwell Dennis around when I did. He wouldn't let me stop trusting the ball, trusting the bounces. But for Nate, he couldn't push through, no matter what any of us said, and the errors kept coming. Just enough to give him a lot to think about. But he did say to me much later, not sure when, he said the only times as a grown-up that he daydreamed about baseball still, it was just about his wife seeing him from the stands for the first time again. Except he was tall. I was in the clubhouse way before anybody else got there one morning. I put my bag in my locker. I walk around the corner toward the weight room, and standing there in the hallway, just looking at me, is a chicken. Nobody else around. And the chicken turns and walks away. When Stu Capps comes in, I say to him, "Hey, Skipper, we have a chicken loose in the stadium." And I expect him to laugh, but he says, "We need to find that chicken." He thinks he knows what's up. He thinks someone on the Centaurs, that's who'd come in for a 4-game series, the Little Rock Centaurs, set that chicken loose because they knew Vinnie Morley had a consuming fear of the slump chicken. This was strictly a Valiance League myth. I never heard of this anywhere else. There were guys who, if they saw a chicken on baseball property, anywhere baseball was played, the curse struck. Instant batting slump. And I didn't know that Vinny completely believed this and lived in constant terror that it might happen. Stu and I, we have maybe 10 more minutes before the guys really start rolling in that afternoon. So we go on the hunt. We're looking in every nook and cranny. At one point, we're standing in the dugout, and he says, "Stop. We're listening. We're listening for the chicken." This is totally ridiculous, and we can't find it. Everyone starts showing up, and Vinny hears there's a chicken on the property, and he goes gray. He says to Stu, "I'll come back when it's found. I'm not seeing that thing." Turns around, he's not doing batting practice. We have a game in 2 hours. No sign of the slump chicken. Fingers Gauthier on the Centaurs fesses up, but he has no idea where it is by now. He bought it from some farmer. He just assumed it would eventually turn up and he'd take it back. But it doesn't show up. And suddenly there are 3 guys on our team who will not stop worrying that it's going to appear and their careers are going to end, because that's allegedly how Art Lima's career ended. He saw a chicken in the parking lot at Valancourt Field and hit 120 for the rest of the year. Art Lima's career ended because he'd been hitting like that since I was in the under-12 Presbyterian All-Stars. But no, the slump chicken is loose, careers are in jeopardy, and Vinny comes back 15 minutes before game time. First thing he says is, "Did you find it?" We got through the game, which we lost. Stu tells everyone, if I hear the phrase slump chicken one more time, the guy who does it is riding the bench for a week. The thing is, I'd gone 0 for 5 that night. I went 0 for 4 the next night. Vinny says to me, no trace of irony, "It's on you, man. There's one thing you got to do now before it gets out of hand." And so he and Steve Green drove me that Monday night, on our night off, to Chucklebuck's Tenders and Fries. They bought me, this was how seriously this was taken, they paid for it, the family meal. You had to eat an entire chicken in one sitting, otherwise the curse was permanent. I'm not sure how the logic aligned on that, but that's what I did because I liked their shakes. And I went 2 for 5 on Tuesday night. That's all I'm saying about that. Ben Garabedian was one of the most interesting guys in the league. When he came to the Lake Dogs, that was team number 4 for him. This was someone in second place on the all-time league home run list. But he would get moved on because he was so tough to manage. He was so focused on hitting the ball out, and his personality was non-existent. He was one of those guys who you got the sense that he couldn't deal with the fact that there were other people on Earth. It actually pained him. He was completely antisocial, a little hostile. And it was weird because anything instructional, he would absolutely help you out. Ink in your swing, conditioning, pitcher tendencies. He would sit you down and go over everything, step by step, for as long as you wanted, until you got it. But anything personal, any kind of joking around, no. And they couldn't ask him to bunt. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't practice it. He wouldn't practice situational hitting, barely, moving guys over. He saw his job description as putting the ball 390 feet into the left field stands. That was it. Outfield practice he only did because that was the line you couldn't cross. A lot of run-ins with Stu. Didn't have a friend on the team, anywhere he went. Got to the clubhouse real early, batting practice till his hands bled, game, then home. He worked on cars sometimes. That was his outlet, I guess. I asked him about my transmission once. Oh yeah, what you got to do is this, and this. And you would thank him, and he would just give you the bend nod, like that. No eye contact. Hits a grand slam to win the game. Everybody wants to hug him. He just does the nod. Stay away. He had one goal: break that home run record. Get to 331. That was Chuck Smoke's record. I would see this tiny glimmer in him once in a while. Like, yeah, he and I could be friends. But nothing else mattered to him. It was just one of those drills you do without thinking, about 15 minutes before game time, just to loosen your arm up. If there was a guy nearby, you just started tossing the ball back and forth. There's not even a name for it. You start kind of close together beside the baseline. And after every throw, you each take a couple more steps back, just lobbing back and forth, longer. Until by the end of the tosses, one of you is at home plate and one of you is deep in the left field corner or the right field corner. It was Ben, actually, strangely enough, I was throwing with. When we're done, I'm in deep left. I walk into the bullpen, and the bullpen coach was John Maximus. He says to me out of nowhere, you know, less than 1 in a million people can do what you just did. I said, what? He said, exert no effort when throwing a baseball 250 feet and hit the glove right at eye level every single time. This is the kind of thing he just said. I thought about it that night when I was at home alone. I thought about that. I think him saying that was what eventually caused me to go to church for the first time in my life. Because he was right. I'd never actually thought of myself before as having a gift. They would throw that word around all the time when I was young. It didn't mean anything to me. But now that I wasn't that kid anymore and I had my own thoughts, I started thinking about that word, gift. Really started thinking about it. Funny how that one throwing session led to that. John would tilt his chair back like this. Back to the very edge of toppling over, and he'd just hang there for an hour, 2 hours. You couldn't believe he could balance like that. But when you looked out into the bullpen, there he was, doing it. But he was such a cool customer. We called him the Brain. He grew up real rough in Queens. His father was a Black Panther. John was like the wise man on the mountain. He would pick up on pitchers' tells. He got Pete Dieterle to stop looking at women in the stands because it told batters he was planning to just waste the next pitch low. John had second sight or something. He was a real visual guy. He was the one who taught us, when you're holding a runner on first and the pitcher throws over, don't slap the tag down on the hand. Slap the tag down on the runner's back. He said it was because no umpire could simultaneously process a tag on the back and see the hand touching the base. The two things were visually too separated, so you'd wind up getting more out calls. And also you were catching the ball a foot closer than you normally would be. He wanted us to swing twice on an intentional walk to start the count at 0-2. He said, why not add 2 to the pitcher's pitch count? Make him that much more fatigued. And it challenged the other manager, hey, we'll give you 2 strikes. You still want to give up that walk? Stuff like that. This advanced thinking that just was a little bit wasted on us sometimes. One time we're in the dugout, and he starts telling us that he wished we always wore our road grays. And we said, why? And he said, outfielders can't pick up your position running around the bases quite as fast. You were more of a blur against the seats and the crowd. And I was laughing. I said, John, is there anything you don't know? What should I do on a first date? And that made Dick Wallace crack up. But John, he doesn't bat an eye. He says, real serious, if there's ever an awkward silence, tell her a story about your childhood. This man was beyond cool. And then one night in Bakersfield, that happened. I was standing on second base when it happened. Their pitcher was holding the ball forever, suddenly. He was looking out into the bullpen. I turned to look that way, and John had gone over. He'd gone over in his chair. He'd finally toppled. He tilted too far back, even for him. He was just getting up very calmly, always unruffled. And he sat back down, and he tilts back again. Thank God it didn't happen in Joliet in front of the home fans. They would have gone insane. But this was a cataclysm. We all waited to see if we were going to lose 12 games in a row or locusts were going to descend from the sky. He'd never gone over. But we were okay. And he just started another string of successfully defying gravity. And we started thinking the league was really going to end about 6 weeks before the post-season meetings where they wound up with a surprise vote on it. Attendance was bad. There were a couple of stadium leases that were about to be defaulted on. Front office people weren't getting paid on time. The grounds crews and the maintenance people were all set to strike. And if you were somehow in on all that information, you knew. There was just nothing public about it, and no one would admit that was what was going to happen. Stu Capps was one of the people who knew. He tried to keep very tight-lipped, but we all just got it from what we figured out. It was sinking in. We were 2 games out of the division lead in mid-September, so we tried to keep our heads down. It wasn't easy. The only one with a sense of humor about it was Donnie Zhao. He said, well, if they just put the outfielders out there without mitts like they said they were going to do, none of this would be happening. Nate got benched mid-season, that last season. The errors killed him. And he wasn't a great on-base guy, so Darren Snouth replaced him. It all came down to the problems with his defense. I think Nate pinch hit once in August, but that was it. He suited up for every game and never moved off the bench. And he was ashamed by that. It kind of messed Stu up too a little bit. He got drunk in his office making out the new lineup. And out of nowhere, he told me he loved us all like we were his sons. And then he immediately swore me not to tell anyone. Nate had one nice moment in baseball that entire last year. In the middle of a game, some hitter for Olympia ripped a foul ball right into our dugout. Scary line drive. Everyone ducks. And still sitting, Nate reaches a hand out and snags it out of the air before it smashes into the water jug right beside him. One-handed catch. Didn't even hurt his hand. Amazing. Poetic justice. I hadn't seen him smile in weeks, but that made him smile. It was raining in the 6th inning against Austin. The umps were kind of going back and forth on whether to stop the game. Right before I went up to the plate, they had a quick conference about it, but they decided to keep going. It was Ivan Voskow throwing. He could hit 100 miles per hour if he really wanted to. And it could be wild. And he could not care about his wildness. And all it was a wet ball that got away from him. Pitch hit me in my left knee right here. The pain was like, It was like this moving Roman candle all up my side and down to my toes. It was exploring my entire body, looking for places to catch hold. I felt it in my fingertips. I laid there. They had to pry my hands off my face. Ivan felt horrible. I wish he'd felt worse. The doctor said no way around surgery. If I got it that month, maybe with enough rehab, I'd only miss the first 6 weeks of the next season. I was at that point the third oldest player in the league. Not sure how that happened. So I plopped down next to Nate on the bench, and we rode that sucker into the playoffs together. Bench buddies. Except both of us kind of knew we were never getting off it again. The night before, I really had to make the call on the surgery so that the team could definitely know. I was lingering a bit in the clubhouse a long time after the game, and I saw Ben. He'd stayed late. He had the pitching machine going, and he was hitting a barrel of balls out into the outfield. He'd been tailing off recently. He wasn't crushing the ball like he usually did. He was 3 homers away from the record. I was watching him, and when he finished, he just walked off. And I kind of lost my mind with him finally. I said, so you're just going to leave those balls out there on the field for Ken and Mike to pick up in the morning? They have to clean up after you, 8 a.m. What is wrong with you? I said, you know what? I'll pick them up. Let me get my crutches. I'll hobble out so I can have one last moment on a baseball field. That'll be my grand farewell. He just stood there. I'd somehow gotten to him. But I didn't wait for him to say anything. I was so mad. I was mad at everything. But at least I had finally gotten to Ben Garabedian. I won't read the one about the lake dogs. I'll actually read the one that I like the best. It's actually the shortest one anyway. And it's just called The Dakota Aardwolves. Who were you when Travis Bizzell sprinted to the left field seats to hand that championship-winning ball to a pale little girl in the second row? The first to triumph, the first to touch the trophy. A team born from one late-night mutinous vote to a place where they barely had the money to pay you. Who were you when the paper said, yes, we're the worst again, bottom dwellers, the alonest of the alone, 7 years straight, and only the Harvey sisters in the bleachers day after day, gay yellow dresses beaming in cold weather, their trumpets sounding for something now stored in the cellar like grape preserves. Were you Mark Leicestershire, daring to steal home in the top of the first? Then Otis Ivy saving the bottom of the ninth? Boy Scouts singing to Sam Cooke during the 7th inning stretch? Or another tired, traded bat getting off the train in Bismarck, waiting for a message about which motel had his bags? Who were you on that last day, now a ward of the state? No more homemade pies sold in Section 10. No longer the fearsome hunters baying at the moon. The mayor told us it was only for a while, but we moved family reunion photos down the mantle, knowing that one title needed a permanent home. We were the first, we told the kids. Where do you keep all the last place finishes? The bullies on West Divide asked before being told to move along. Please stand back from the fence until the last panels of the outfield walls are trucked away. That pale little girl attends Georgetown now, and she only flies back home for Christmas. But when her friends ask her what the Dakotas are like, she tells them a baseball player once ran to her with a caught third out, nestling it in her tiny hand. He'd grinned like he'd been in the room when she was born, and that's what the bullies can't understand. You just had 2 playoff games. That was all there was. So we beat Twin Cities on the road. Beautiful game, beautiful comeback. I was so proud of those guys for that comeback. And then we were at home for the title game against Alston. I'd never been part of an atmosphere like that while I was in baseball. It was easily 15,000 people, which was amazing because it was pretty much known by then that there wasn't going to be another season. It was just a great feeling to be there, even though I couldn't play. And it was surreal how short that tension and that excitement were. They smacked Dick Wallace around pretty hard in the top of the first. They were just on him. Stuff kept getting through. And they were aggressive on the bases. So things got quieter. And then in the second, the wheels just fell off. We made those two dumb mistakes. I was just stunned. It was like being stuck in a dream. It was our old buddy, Ivan Voskow. Again, he was mowing through us. He had every pitch that night. Then the fourth inning, when Aaron Roydell hit that ball with the bases loaded, you could hear that crack in Chicago. I couldn't look. I did not look directly at the ball as it went out. And by the middle of the fourth inning of the biggest game of our lives, it was over. It became an hour and a half of nobody saying anything. To go out that way, we were all expecting to be tense all the way through, and we were prepared to win or lose, but even the tension, even the narrative got taken from us. I felt bad for the fans even. They didn't even get a narrative to remember. Ben didn't get his homer in the fifth, which meant it was going to be real tough to break the record. Maybe he could tie it. But little boys don't want ties. We want to be the best one. It took us, I think, till the ninth inning, really, to lose that shame where you didn't even want to stand at the railing and watch the game. You wanted to stay on the bench and just hide. When the ninth came, the perspective began to come back. We started to talk to each other again. The score didn't change much. They tacked on a couple in the eighth. We'd gone through pretty much the whole bullpen by then. Nobody really left the stands. No one seemed to want to leave the park. I could definitely get that. There were 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, and Vinny takes a walk. He could have turned on that 3-1 pitch. It was right where he liked it. But he let it go because that would give Ben one last time at bat. Try to tie that record. He's in the on-deck circle. Here we go, at least. Here's a fitting end to the season. Everyone's going to get to see if he can pull even with Chuck Schmoke. Fans start getting on their feet. Okay, a little redemption maybe. But he didn't start walking toward the plate. Instead, he turns and he walks back toward the dugout. And he turns his bat around and he stops and he holds it out towards me, like this. And he says, "Paul, come on, get up there." I'm looking around like, what are you doing? And he just says my name again. He's not going up to the plate. Frank Olmhall is walking over saying, "Hey, let's have a batter here." I'm caught in this bizarre floodlight of attention. I stand up and I say, "Ben, go take your shot." And he shakes his head. He says to me, "I don't want it. Come be on the field." I say, "Ben, I can barely walk." And Stu is pushing me real gentle to the steps. Olmhall says something kind of nasty to both of us, which I won't repeat. And I take the bat from Ben. His bat, not mine. He gives me his bat. His face is completely unreadable. And I start hobbling to the plate, or Olm the Terrible is going to throw Stu out, and probably Ben too. Stu goes out there, they make the lineup change, and everyone starts making this incredible noise in the stands for us. And then I'm in the box, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't even plant my left foot. And I look at Ivan, he's still in the game. He's going start to finish. Why not? 11-run lead. And he nods at me, and he winds up, and he gives me a nasty curveball. He's not letting up one bit. I had a lot of respect for him then. For him to bring all he had, that was his version of saying he hoped we were good with each other. When he threw that and it hit the mitt, that was probably the loudest I've ever heard a Joliet crowd be. If you told me there were 30,000 people suddenly, I would have believed you. The second pitch I swing at, it was right in my zone, just inside the plate, but I was over anxious, and I got too far out in front of it, and I hit it to third, one hop, and Nick Pulte speared it, backhand, sweet play. And he was trying to at least be fair and let me get out of the box before he threw. I got maybe 5 steps. I couldn't really go any further. The knee was still too weak. And Magic Jenny caught the throw, and that was the end of the game. That was the title, Austin's third title. The crowd didn't seem to care. They were cheering for us and for Ben and I guess for me. And the Austin players were all whooping it up behind me. And I limped over to Ben and I said, "Thanks, man." And he just did the Ben nod. Nothing more than that. And the fans wouldn't let us leave the field until we'd all at least come back out one more time and waved. We were all in the clubhouse for 3 hours, except Ben. He didn't really stay. Everyone wanted to shake his hand. And he did stick around, and he did that. And I told him I'd never forget him, which was true. And he obviously was embarrassed by that. Then out the door before anybody else, just like he always did. By the end of the night, it was like we hadn't even lost. We were all so drunk, and we were laughing at each other and carrying on. Koch Foley had his guitar, and the grounds crew intern, whose name I forget, had his banjo, and Ken Steakley was singing Rocky Mountain High and stripping for some reason. Even Nate was slapping his glove on his knee to keep rhythm. We all started talking about things that had nothing to do with baseball. The mood had pretty much flipped. It was just 30 sad, unemployed idiots having a party. And I don't remember any of us saying anything to each other about this being the end. We wouldn't speak the words. Though I saw Stu crying a little. He didn't even know he was crying. I hobbled home to Tina. I never got my surgery. The first day my leg felt strong enough so I could go tramping again out near that one farm. I started out the way that goes right past the stadium. And that was one of the last times I ever saw it. Empty like that. First week of December. But man, did I smack that last pitch. Straight fastball. I was just a little too early on it. Twizzler, where are you going? You know you're not supposed to go in there. Come on.
Little Boy Games by Soren Narnia.